Good morning, everybody. It is October 19th, Monday, and if you're watching this, you have opened up Schoology and checked your daily schedule, and you know that this is the thing that you need to be doing today. Today, we're going to be doing a reading from a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. John Perkins was a financial analyst who worked for non-governmental organizations employed by the WTO and the International Monetary Fund. And they would go to developing nations and they would create a sort of a blueprint for them to develop their infrastructure. So he'd look at the electrical systems they might need, or the roadways, or the waterways that they might need to develop their economy, to develop their cities. And then the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization and the G8 would come in and loan them money. So these countries got loans from these organizations. Except there were some nefarious things going on behind the scenes where these countries were never really meant to pay back the loans. So I'd like you to read the first 5 chapters of John Perkins' book. And then while you're reading, I want you to be looking at a set of things that we're going to be talking about when we talk about narrative fiction, but it also applies to these types of autobiographies. So these things are characters. So for every chapter, I want you to list the characters in that chapter specifically. And I want you to sort of summarize what that character did, who that character was, what they were like, what they thought, the choices they made, especially the choices they make. That's sort of a big theme for us in narrative analysis, is we're looking at the choices and consequences of those choices that every character makes, right? There's no plot in a story. There's just choices and consequences. Things don't happen to characters. Things happen because somebody decided to do something, and there are consequences of that decision. So be especially aware of the choices that characters make in each chapter. Secondly, I'd like you to look at the conflict. So the conflict is, for each character going to be different. What obstacles do the characters face? Now, it might be something as simple as the obstacle of, I am fresh out of college and I have to find a job. So that's an obstacle. The obstacle is I don't have a job and I need to be able to find one. Sometimes the obstacles are external like that. Sometimes they're internal. Like I'm fresh out of college. I need to find a job. I've been offered a job by a company that doesn't necessarily fit with my moral compass. So do I take that job or not? So the internal conflict characters face might be expressed by the author. And then the external conflict will be something that when they come up against it in the world, they have to decide how they're going to tackle that obstacle. So for each chapter, again, look at each of the characters and then the obstacles those characters face and the choices that they make to tackle each obstacle. And then lastly, and this is maybe my favorite, we're going to be talking about theme. So theme, usually theme is thought of as like a 1 or 2 word summation of, kind of like what the story is about. But that's not how I like to look at theme. Like if we looked at, if we looked at any war movie, the theme might be brotherhood or something like that, right? Honestly, like any movie where soldiers fight together, you could say the theme is brotherhood. For me, the theme of a piece is more, I guess it's easier to and better to understand it as a dramatic argument, a central dramatic argument. And so since we learned a little bit about argumentation last quarter, this is what the author is arguing. And these arguments are based on an exploration of humanity, right? So what does it mean to be human? All these aspects of humanity are explored through narrative fiction, through creative nonfiction, through autobiographies. And so I want you to start thinking about narrative fiction or any writing in that way. Sort of, why does this exist? What argument is the author making about humanity, about the essential nature of what it means to be a person? So I have an example here for Finding Nemo. Now, I'm assuming most of you have seen this. If not, we'll talk about a different example. We'll talk about lots of examples later. But for Finding Nemo, this is something that I think most of you will be able to identify with. So let's look at the character of Marlin's dad, or Nemo's dad, Marlin. So Marlin is the dad. The conflict that Marlin is up against is Nemo has been kidnapped, right? But really, before that, it was that Nemo was rebelling against Marlin's rules. So Nemo was actually the original conflict that Marlin had. Marlin was dealing with a rebellious, growing child who wanted more freedom. And Marlin's choice was to clamp down on that freedom at every turn. Then Nemo gets kidnapped. So he chooses to leave the safety of his home and go find Nemo. He runs into Dory, but Dory is forgetful. But then he realizes that Dory has something about her that's helpful, right? She can read, which means she's going to be able to help guide him to where Nemo is. So he chooses to stick with her. Lots of stuff happens, but then they get eaten by a whale. Okay, so this is kind of like they're going to die. The whale's going to digest them, and that's it. And then Dory says she can speak whale. Marlin's like, no, you can't. Dory says the whale's telling us to go back to the back of the throat. And Marlin's like, that's stupid. And then finally, Dory tells Marlin that he just needs to let go, right? Let go and trust her. Literally let go of the whale and fall down to where he thinks is certain death. But he does. He chooses to let go. And he does so, and they're spat out from the blowhole, and they end up in Sydney Harbor. And so at the very end, Marlin chooses to trust Nemo and let him help, even though it's a dangerous situation. So when Nemo and Dory and everybody are caught up in the net at the very end, and Nemo uses his new knowledge about how to escape from a net that he learned in the dentist's fish tank, Marlin now trusts Nemo to do something even though it's dangerous. Marlin lets go. Marlin, makes it so that he chooses to relinquish control for the first time ever in Nemo's life. And so I would say that the central dramatic argument of this piece is that children can't grow up unless their parents let them go. Or maybe overprotective parenting leads to disastrous results. That one's it kind of makes sense, but it doesn't take into account what happens at the end, because things do resolve in a positive way. So I would say that it's kind of like, if you love something, you have to let it go, but that's a little cliche. I think more specifically, children can't grow up. They can't become adults. They can't grow unless their parents let them go. So that would be an example of how to identify the theme, or more specifically, the central dramatic argument of a piece. For this book, since it's an autobiography, it's told in a narrative way. And so you will be able to identify a theme, a central dramatic argument. And so I know that we haven't really talked a lot about this yet, so I just want you to give it a shot, right? Do your best to try to tease out from the reading what you think the purpose of this book is. What aspect of humanity is this book exploring? And we'll talk about this in class. We'll talk about this on Zoom with my distance students. But these are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at, not just because we're reading about sort of economic related narrative fiction, but this is something that in narrative specifically, as we look at storytelling this quarter, we're going to be drilling down on all of these things constantly. So this is your first attempt, and I want you to try your best. Beyond that, there's nothing else for today. So you'll find the reading in Schoology, which is in the books and videos folder. So if you go to course dashboards and go to courses, I just want to show you where it is so everybody knows. Hope you had a good weekend. All right, and here we are. Books, articles, videos. Open that up, and here we are. John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So this is chapters 1 through 5. Try to finish this today. It's not a long read. It's probably roughly 30 pages. But you have a 2-hour window to get this work done, and then we'll be able to talk about this and discuss this tomorrow and Wednesday. All right, have a great Monday, and I will see you soon.